Morning YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Sunday the 4th of October 2015. Getting ready to record The Outsiders and hopefully First Moondog. Daylight saving started today.
Time now for Outsiders. I'm Barry Cassidy and you're not. ASIO is, and this morning's guests, political scientist, Associate Professor Sarah Madison from the University of Melbourne, Alex Lee. She's a politics reporter for BuzzFeed, and Georgina Downer. She's on the Administrative Committee of the Vic Liberal Party and Director of Diplomacy at AsiaLink at the University of Melbourne. Welcome all. Sad events on Friday. A shooting in Sydney, a shooting in Parramatta, a 15-year-old boy responsible, a young radicalised Muslim boy. The Prime Minister spoke out pretty strongly in response.
We must not vilify or blame the entire Muslim community for the actions of what is in truth a very, very small percentage of violent extremist individuals.
Test here, Georgina Downer for the PM. We had a conversation already building last week ahead of this shooting on trying to rebuild relationships with Australia's Muslim communities and government and agencies, security agencies. How does the PM play this?
Well, I think the PM is setting the right tone. The security agencies cannot cope with this problem by themselves. They've identified that these lone wolf attacks are going to be our biggest threat in Australia.
This boy was off the radar.
This boy was off the radar. His parents will be, of course, deeply upset, but also need to reflect on what they missed. His community members around them also need to reflect on what they missed, and we need to work together as an Australian community to help the Muslim community identify people at risk of radicalisation before this type of thing happens again.
How do we do that, Sarah? I mean, here's a 15-year-old who somehow has got access to a handgun and has bad thoughts in his head.
I think there are so many layers to this problem. I mean, let's start by remembering that a 15-year-old is a child. And I think as a community, we have a collective responsibility to understand how and why a child in our community could feel so alienated and angry that they would take up a weapon and take another life. I think that is a responsibility not just of the Muslim community, but of the Australian community. That kid is not feeling alienated just by his own community, and the responsibility can't just rest there. And I think that the most sensible thing that the Prime Minister said in the wake of this was to point to the need to separate out the security issue and the social issue. We've seen too much marginalisation of the Muslim community and vilification based on a lot of ignorance and misunderstanding, and there's a lot of bridges to be rebuilt, I think, and that's going to be the pathway to making sure that this doesn't happen again.
Which is a tough thing, isn't it, Alex Lee, in the aftermath of something like this, to act so broadly, so sympathetically, so sort of wisely is a hard thing.
That's right, but I think, everyone was looking for a fresh start on this conversation. I think, it's hard to kind of come out with a message of welcoming the community straight after this. I think, for some people that would have rubbed them up a long way, but I think it was absolutely the right thing to do, like reset the conversation and allow all of the Muslim community to feel like they can be in on this conversation again.
And I guess, Georgina, there are phases in these sorts of conversations and processes, and perhaps Death Cult Team Australia was a phase. Perhaps there's a new phase now which is more conciliatory.
Every politician, every Prime Minister will have their own turns of phrase. Malcolm Turnbull's are quite different from Tony Abbott's, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Malcolm Turnbull is completely disassociated from the views of Tony Abbott in this regard. His presentation is different, I'll admit that. But he and Tony Abbott both share the same concerns about these lone wolf attacks, about the risks of youth radicalisation in Australia, and that it is incumbent on family members, community members to identify these issues. It just cannot be down to security services to do that.
And it's interesting, Sarah, and perhaps a good sign in a way that and putting these things into their context as well. The PM yesterday went to the football. I mean, he says, I think it's an important thing, get on with your lives.
Absolutely. I mean, this, well, get on with our lives. We don't want to normalise this too much. And I think it was appropriate to take a moment of reflection. You know, and I mean, to point to the football, when I say this is a social responsibility, you know, we want to see a broader acceptance of, you know, Islamic people of Islamic faith, people of other faiths represented in our sporting codes, on our television stations. You know, we're still a very monocultural in the way we represent ourselves in those big events. And I think that's part of the problem. If I was a young Muslim boy growing up in this society, where would I see myself reflected? Where would I find my heroes? Would it just be in those you know, jihadists overseas? Would that be the role model that I was looking up to? And again, that's not just a responsibility of the Muslim community.
Which is not to excuse it either. I mean, to sort of say, well, look, you're alien, we understand why you took that handgun and put it at the back of someone's head. That's...
Look, I mean, I worked in juvenile justice many years ago for quite a long time. And I guess events like this cause me to reflect yet again on the point of our justice system when it's applied to young people. I worked with murderers back then. And the reality is, if this 15-year-old kid goes to jail for 10 or 15 years, which is the likely outcome, he will come out, he'll be brutalised in there. That's what will happen to him. He'll be raped, he'll be brutalised, he will come out and he will commit further violent offences. That is an absolute ironclad guarantee. If as a society we are able to come up with more compassionate responses to these situations, I have seen young people turn their lives around dramatically, and I would have thought that as a society that's actually the preferred outcome. I think we're a very, very long way from having that kind of conversation right now.
Well, and that's a tough test for us, isn't it, Alex, to swallow our immediate anger and to look at that longer picture and to see what compassion might bring in that longer term solution.
That's right. I mean, it's so easy to point to a community which we feel is kind of separate from our own and say, well, although there's problems there and we'll help them fix it. But I think Sarah's got a really good point that we do need to look at representation, and it is so important to not alienate them further, like not only from a social point of view, but also from a national security point of view. Like, you know, they can't get intelligence if they don't feel like they have that sense of inclusion from them. So it's really important.
But let's not forget this kid who actually was shot by police officers after, so he's not going to be subject to the justice system in this case. He did commit a murder. He shot an innocent police accountant point blank, dead. I mean, this is not a kid who's just done something, you know, I don't know, robbed a lolly shop.
It's not joyriding in a stolen car.
This is murder. This is murder. This is a national tragedy. It's a personal tragedy for the Chen family. It's a national tragedy. So, I mean, let's reflect on those aspects of this debate as well.
Yeah, no, a fair point, and I think that's sort of where you're driving to with that, Sarah. I mean, that's an appalling horror, and yet our focus needs to be on the prevention of that recurring, which is a broad set of solutions if we're going to stop that.
Yeah, and it is a fundamentally social response, that if we just pursue a security response, if we just pursue a political response, you know, we'll see this kind of situation repeat. We've seen this kind of situation repeat and escalate in the UK, for example, where there's been a known problem with marginalisation and radicalisation of Islamic youth for some time. And, you know, in the US, ironically, we see that same marginalisation among extreme right young white men. You know, they have some similar questions to ask.
They have some other questions to answer too on the evidence of last week's shootings,
and particularly in relation to their gun culture. You know, thankfully we don't have that situation here.
Although here we still have a young man with a handgun, so that's.
I mean, the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, Connie Fierravanti-Wells, who has worked with multicultural communities for over 30 years, she describes this issue we're facing of radicalised youth really as a social problem with a national security angle. I think that's right. And I think that
very wise words from her last week, and part of this sort of eerily juxtaposed conversation we were already having last week before this shooting on that relationship with groups in our community.
I mean, I do think we can overstate state the security implications of a 15-year-old kid getting a gun and shooting someone. I mean, I'm not trivializing that event for 1 minute, but we do also see young people in gangs with access to weapons committing violent crime. You know, we don't call that a national security issue.
Well, the same root cause has different manifestations.
That's right, but because this kid was Muslim, we call it a national security issue, because that's what was, you know, the external expression of his anger and his alienation. We put it in the national security basket, and I think that the social roots of that are actually far more significant.
10 to 10 here on Sunday Extra. Outsiders with you, Sarah Madison, Alex Lee and Georgina Downer. Alex, have you been enjoying Tony Abbott's No Sniping World Tour in this past week?
Oh, it's been amazing. I actually said in in the office when he came on, listening to his latest interview on Thursday, it's just like you kind of miss his voice a bit, you know. Just those, you know, it is. It's that sense of, you know, no one could turn a clumsy phrase like Tony Abbott.
Don't be cruel.
No, I won't.
The man's in pain. And look, as a treat to you, here's a bit of Tony Abbott from last week.
Well, that's a very good question, and it's probably one where I might exercise the former Prime Minister's prerogative of silence. I mean, there's obviously been a lot of dirty water under the bridge, and I guess in time, all things are more readily understood.
Georgina, Tony Abbott, they're responding to Neil Mitchell. Neil Mitchell asked him if he had forgiven Malcolm Turnbull at this point. It's unreasonable to expect that he would have done.
I'm always amazed how people hold politicians up to a higher bar than they would ever hold themselves or their friends and family. I mean, Tony Abbott has lost his job, and he lost it in a rather...
Got voted out by his friends.
Yeah.
Like Survivor.
I think the man is entitled to feel a bit upset, a bit dejected.
Is he entitled to make that public, though?
He's a politician. He's an elected representative of the people of Australia. He is absolutely entitled to speak to the media about his views on what's been going on. He is also able to defend his legacy. He's entirely appropriate for him to defend his legacy. He has a great legacy, actually. He almost won the 2010 election. He won the 2013 election. He delivered us from some serious political instability with the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years, and he was able to implement a significant raft of policies. Look, his presentation style didn't suit everyone, and Malcolm Turnbull's made a case that he is going to deliver a 21st century government with a different presentation style. And, you know, we've as a party, the Liberal Party is really excited to see what Malcolm Turnbull can do.
Are we watching the beginning of the Rudd redux, do you think, Sarah? Is we down the same rabbit hole?
Well, I mean, look, first I'd like to say that I do hold politicians to a higher standard. I think if you put yourself forward for public office and you hold yourself up as someone capable of representing the public, then, yep, absolutely. I expect that of anyone in public life, actually, who's chosen to be. Yeah, right? You know, I hope Tony Abbott has the good sense to not take us back down another Kevin Rudd rabbit hole. It was pretty unedifying spectacle. I doubt that he will be too destabilising from the backbench, because I think, unlike Rudd, he must surely know that his leadership career is over, that there won't be an Abbott resurrection in the way that there was very foolishly a Rudd resurrection.
Rudd knew he had that sort of big body of public support, that you know, there was a case for him still being in the top job.
Yes, he was somewhat extraordinarily popular with the voting public almost until the very end. And Abbott certainly doesn't enjoy that popularity. I think a lot of his extreme language, his sloganeering has been really off-putting. I think it really started with the 2014 budget. I thought it was extraordinary that he attempted to defend that this week. I think that was the beginning of the end for him, when it was really revealed what a mean approach to governing the country underlay his.
I guess the thing, Alex Lee, for Malcolm Turnbull, just and the final point, is to just get on with it and move on and you know, do the things he has to do.
Yeah, that he obviously doesn't want to dwell on that, and every time Abbott gives an interview, the media, or they just want to dissect that, and so he's, you know, it's interesting to see how he's approaching it. Like, there are obviously a few big issues that he's not touching at the moment, like climate change and same-sex marriage, but he's already...
Here we go on the upload limit. The Outsiders will be a new broadcast.